My grandmother's name was Alberta, and somewhere in the history of my family, way back through the mountains of West Virginia, there were women that knew things. I'm talking about really important things, the kind of knowing that doesn't come from books, but comes from watching and doing and being handed something by the women who came before you. I started going through Alberta's recipe box, and I was going through her recipes and her notes and her handwriting on scraps of tiny little pieces of paper, following a thread that landed me smack dab in Appalachia, way further than I ever expected to go. It led me to these incredibly powerful women in my family. And I'm not talking about the type of women that you're going to find in history books, because most of them don't show up in our history at all. I'm talking about real working women that lived in the mountains, ones that we call granny women, the ones who were growing the food and preserving food and healing the sick with nutrient-dense food, delivering babies and keeping the community alive through every single hard winter and every lean year. Today, I want to tell you who these women were, what they carried, and what every single thing we do in the Sovereign Kitchen Society, I'm talking about the fermentation, preservation, and the building of a real pantry, it all comes from them. So this is where it all starts. I want to welcome you to the Sovereign Kitchen Society. I'm Molly Bravo, chef, food preservationalist, founder of Wilder Space Catering in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and of course, the person who is very convinced that the most radical act that you can do right now is learn how to take care of your own kitchen. So this show is all about old world skills and why they matter today more than ever. Real knowledge passed through real hands for real life. Every episode, we go deep on history, technique, the why behind the what. And we leave with something that you can actually apply this week. If you're new here, please subscribe and welcome home. And if you've been waiting for me to come back, I am here and I am so happy to be here. This season is going to be the best season that we have had yet. This episode, of course, is also brought to you by none other than Wilder Space, our farm-to-table catering company in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where we focus on whole animal cooking, seasonal menus, food that is sourced from people that we know and trust. And if you have an event that deserves real food at the table, come find us. We would love to work with you. We would love to cook for you. You can find us at wilderspace.com. When most people think about Appalachian culture, what they have been handed is a caricature of sorts. Poor, isolated. Maybe you're going to think about people being behind the times. And when it comes to the food, you're probably going to think about survival food at the very minimum. Humble food. Food that doesn't really even count as cuisine. But I need you to completely let go of anything that you have heard in the past, because what was actually happening in those mountains and what those women were actually doing was one of the most sophisticated food systems this country has ever produced. And it was run entirely by women, mind you. In Appalachian communities, there was this figure. And the figure was called a granny woman. She went by a different name depending on wherever you lived. Some people were called root women, yarb doctors, the old one, but the role was the same anywhere you went. She was the person that the community turned to for everything that required deep knowledge: healing, birth, death, the garden, the harvest, the preserving. She knew which plants healed and which ones were going to harm you. She knew how to cure meat and when to plant according to the moon and what to do when the ferment smelled wrong. She was the encyclopedia for a very practical survival for anyone who was around her. This role was not given to her by anyone. It was actually earned, and it was earned through decades of learning and doing, and it was passed down through the female bloodline, grandmother to daughter. The knowledge wasn't written down. It lived in the body. It lived in the hands. The Smithsonian documented this. They call it the kitchen conjure or granny magic. And while these words carry a kind of mystical flavor, the core of it was something deeply practical. It was a woman who understood the natural world at a level that most of us today cannot even fathom. There were two things that were happening inside of what got called granny magic. The first one was science, which is like centuries of accumulated empirical knowledge about plants and fermentation and preservation and the human body. Knowledge that women themselves would not have called science at all, but in essence, that's exactly what it was. And then the other was a belief that the energy that you brought into the kitchen, your intention, your state of mind, your spiritual relationship to that food affected how it nourished people. In today's terms, it would be called alchemy in the kitchen, the secret ingredient, that recipes pass through memory and hands rather than measurements, and that the granny women believed the spirit of the place and the person that was making that food. It was so important. It was as important as any ingredient in the pot that they were making. Now, I'm not asking you to believe this or not believe it, but what I will tell you is this. I have cooked in a lot of kitchens for a very long time. I have eaten food that has been made by many people, many hands, and there is a difference between food that is made with love and food that is just slopped together without any intention whatsoever. Perhaps the person making your food is distracted or resentful. I mean, I don't know what to call that kind of difference, but I know the taste. I know what it tastes like when somebody's heart is not in a dish. And these women had a name for that very specific feeling. Some of the practices that got recorded as superstition were actually deeply functional. So let me give you a few examples because I find this totally fascinating. There was a tradition that women should not can food or cure meat. I know this sounds gross, but they should not can food or cure meat while menstruating. The belief being that the energy of a woman's body in that state would actually cause the food to spoil or the batch to fail. Now, the rule about never leaving food uncovered or unattended on the stove, leftovers uncovered, were said to attract wayward spirits. What this practice actually did was prevent food contamination. Planting by the moon phases. I'm sure you guys have heard of this, and this one I know to be true. Root vegetables during the dark of the moon, fruiting plants during the waxing moon. Lunar cycles actually affect the soil moisture, germination rates. So these women were observing patterns across decades of planting seasons and encoding what actually worked into a framework that their community could remember and follow. The folklore back then was the science. It was just science dressed in a language that the world in which these women lived in could understand. And it was passed down through the female line, woman to woman, in an unbroken chain until the chain started to break. So let's talk a little bit about the cultural roots of that knowledge, because this is so fascinating, you guys. Appalachian food culture was not just one thing. It was a convergence of at least 3 distinct knowledge traditions that came together in the mountains and created something entirely new. The Cherokee and other indigenous nations of the region brought the foundational relationship with this specific land. It was known as the Three Sisters, which you may have heard of, which is corn, beans, and squash that formed this super nutritional backbone of mountain diet. It was a staple in Appalachia, and centuries of knowledge about which plants healed and which plants harmed. And when the granny women were foraging, they were drawing on all of these indigenous knowledges that had been accumulating in those mountains for years. The Scot-Irish and the English settlers brought fermentation traditions, dairy skills, meat curing, smoking, biscuit making, and the oral storytelling culture that became the transmission mechanism for all of this. The strong clan bonds, the deep respect for elder women, the belief in the unseen world was adopted into the Appalachian soil. And African American women whose contributions to Appalachian food culture brought the deep knowledge of this delicious pork cookery, of greens and beans and molasses, and the soul of the seasoning and the slow-cooked richness that defines the tradition of Southern cuisine. So they brought their own preservation techniques, their own herbalism, their own spiritual relationship with food, and those traditions wove into the fabric of Appalachian cooking in ways that are still visible to this very day. So what came out of that convergence, the knowledge that lived in the granny women, was way bigger than any one of those traditions individually. It was something mountain made. It was something that belonged specifically to that region, those specific ridges and hollows and seasons, and that specific community of women who kept it alive. I'm going to just share a little bit about where my family fits into all of this because it lights me up. I told you that Alberta's box led me somewhere. And let me just tell you where it led me. When I started pulling on the thread of my family history, like really pulling on it, I ended up going back generations. And I knew that the records and genealogy and the stories were still held by older relatives that are alive to this very day. And I ended up finding my way into Wayne County, West Virginia. Now, the mountains of southern West Virginia, Appalachian country, is right here in the heart of all of this. The family lines that run through my heritage include the Hammock family, and carrying the woodland and folk music traditions that defined the region. And then there were the Wilsons, one of the prominent pioneering families of Wayne County, with their Scotch-Irish roots and the deep tradition of signs, planting by the moon, reading the land, the haint stories, and the community bonds that kept people alive through hard years. And then, of course, there are the McCains, who brought the oral traditional storytelling and the clan-like community bonds of early Appalachian survival. So these are not just distant strangers to me. These are the people that I come from. My grandmother, my great-grandmother cooked the way that she cooked because of women that I will never know by name. Women who strung beans in hollows that I'll probably never be able to visit. Women who packed crocks by firelight and tended root cellars through mountain winters and handed something down, hand to hand, generation to generation, until it reached my kitchen right here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So there's a direct line into my family lineage in West Virginia and the tradition of believing in signs. So it's not just about moon planting, but it's about this whole framework of paying attention to what the natural world was trying to tell you. The miners and the farmers both operated in the same way. So you're supposed to read the signs, you're supposed to pay attention and notice things, and then you're supposed to trust what your observations were telling you, even when you couldn't explain why. Alberta's recipe notes, my grandmother, Miss Minnie, and her recipe notes never had measurements. They were examples of what might taste good, a little splash of this or a little dash of that. It was a woman that was telling you, you need to trust yourself. You need to know what tastes good and what doesn't. And to know that you have learned this recipe from the inside out after years and years of watching your mother or your grandmother make the same recipe. So that is in essence what Granny Magic is all about. It's about carrying forward in a shoebox, in my grandmother's little recipe box, all of the recipes, all of the knowledge that you have accumulated over the years through generations of working with specific ingredients or recipes. It's the belief that knowledge lives inside of you, that you can be trusted with it, that the point of teaching is not necessarily to create dependence on the teacher, but it's to make the student capable of standing on their own. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here in the Sovereign Kitchen Society. It's not about following instructions forever, but actually learning how to deepen the knowledge that you already have so that you do not need to lean on other people for information any longer. It's meant to infuse you and build the skills and the confidence and the pantry so that you are able to set yourself free. Right now, we are in the middle of this tradition. And the place to start is always in preservation. The Essential Canning Cookbook, which was published last year in August, is the foundation for that very thing. It's the entry point to everything. And the link is going to be in the show notes if you want to grab a copy. A full pantry is always going to be freedom. It's not meant to be a tagline. It is literally an inheritance that you are being given from past generations. Now, as you know, we never want to leave this episode without a little bit of homework, and that is how we are going to do it today. I'm going to give you 3 things. I'm going to give you 2 skills that you can start implementing from the Appalachian tradition, practices that you can start this week, both that cost almost nothing, and 1 mind shift, which I think matters even more than the skills. Number 1, I want you to always save your pot liquor. What is pot liquor? Pot liquor is the liquid that is left in the pot after you cook all of your greens, your collards, your turnip greens, your mustard greens, your beans, all of it. That is where all of the minerals lie. That's where all the healing takes place. And back in the day, the women of Appalachia never poured this down the drain. They drank it like a tonic. They cooked cornbread in it. They gave it to sick neighbors and tired children and elders who needed building up. When you are cooking leafy greens in water, the water-soluble nutrients that migrate out of the plant and into the liquid, like potassium and folate and vitamin K and iron, all of that stuff gets left inside of that water. So it's super nutrient dense. And most of us are used to just throwing that right down the sink without even a second thought. Do not do that. You have to stop doing that. So this week, I want you to save that liquid. I want you to drink a cup of it when it's warm. I want you to cook your rice in it instead of the water. And I want you to use it as a base for your next soup. The granny women called it medicine, and I call it not wasting something that is already in your pot. The second thing that I want you to do, I want you to start stringing your beans. I want you to learn to make leather britches because we are in the heat of summer right now. You are going to have beans coming out your ears if you happen to grow your own food. And this is one of the most direct lines that you can draw out of the Appalachian women that we have been talking about today. Leather britches was described by historians as a community ritual of resilience. Women would work together stringing these beans, talking, passing knowledge between them while their hands were super busy. And And this is how you do it. It is so simple. Take a little darning needle and a long piece of plain cotton thread. Run that needle through the center of each of the whole green beans and the whole pod. So don't shell them, but just like string it through the pod. And you're going to stack the beans up on the thread. And then you're going to hang that string anywhere. You can hang it from the rafters of your kitchen or in a different room. You just want to make sure that it has really good airflow. A porch would be a great place for that. A pantry window, maybe near the wood stove if you happen to have one. And in 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to have this incredible shelf-stable bean that is good for months. So when you are cooking them, you're going to let them soak overnight, just like you always do with all beans. And then you're going to cook them low and slow with a really rich ham hock or a salt pork. And what comes out is nothing like canned green beans. It's earthier and it's more concentrated. It's more savory and it's a completely different ingredient with a completely different depth. And the principle underneath that practice is to remove the moisture, to remove the conditions for spoilage. No electricity, no equipment, a needle, a thread, some air. It's the same mechanism that your dehydrator uses, understood and practiced by mountain women 200 years before the first dehydrator was built. So green beans, they're super in season right now. Get some this weekend, string them, hang them, and in a couple of months, you're going to pull them down and you're going to cook them and taste something that has a 200-year-old story in it. The third thing that I want you to focus on is the mindset shift. This is the one that I think truly changes everything. The granny women didn't think of their kitchen knowledge as a hobby or a project or some weird trend that they were participating in on Instagram. It was all about their identity, you guys. It was all about who they were in the world. It's all they knew. The knowing was inseparable from the person. And what we are doing in the Sovereign Kitchen Society, the fermentation, the canning, the building of a real pantry, the learning of these old world skills isn't about having a hobby either. It is about a decision, a declaration to the world about who you want to be and how you want to show up in this world. It's about what you choose to support and how you want to live. It is a decision that your kitchen is a place of power. It's not a place of convenience. It's a decision that the knowledge lives inside of you, not in the grocery store. The Pantry of Plenty exists for exactly this reason. It's not to give you the recipes, though the recipes are great, but it's really to give you the framework and the system so that this knowledge starts to live inside of your bones the way that it lived in theirs, so that you stop needing to look things up because you've done them enough times and you know them by hand, that your hands are actually doing the work for you and your mind gets to turn off and rest. That's what Alberta had. That's what my granny, Miss Minnie, had. That's what the granny women of Appalachia had. And today it is yours to build, starting in your own kitchen, starting this week. There's a quote that I have loved for so long, especially since I've started going down this rabbit hole. And it comes from the oral tradition of Appalachian kitchens. And it's been passed down woman to woman for a very long time. You cook what you have, you use what you cooked, and you never ever let go what you can still keep. This is a whole way of being and showing up in the world. It's a way of paying attention to what you have, using what you have completely, wasting nothing, and holding on to the knowledge of how to do it. The women of Appalachia held their communities together through the kitchen, through ferment crocks, and the strung beans that the root cellars and the pot likker and the moonlit planting and the granny wisdom that got handed from one pair of hands to the next. They didn't call themselves sovereign. They didn't have a podcast about it. They just knew exactly what to do, and that knowing made them free. It set them free in the most fundamental way that a person can be free. Alberta had that knowing. The women in my family line back through Wayne County, West Virginia had that knowing. The Hammocks and the Wilsons and the McCains all the way back to Appalachian Hollows and the Cherokee women who first understood this land. And I believe that it is not lost. It's waiting. It's waiting in the crocks that we fill. It's waiting in the beans that we string. It's waiting in the liquid that we saved instead of poured away. And in every small act of deciding that we're going to know how to do this, whatever it takes. So this is what we're building here, and I'm so glad that you're building it with me. The companion piece to this episode, the deeper dives into the Appalachian preservation, the Granny Women tradition, and what this means for how we're building our pantries today is over at wilderspace.substack.com. I really hope that you come find it. I would love to share it with you. And if you strung beans this week, or if you saved your pot liquor, or this episode made you go find your grandmother's recipes, please tell me about it. I would love to connect with you on Instagram. You can find us at the Sovereign Kitchen Society. I want to see what you're doing, and I truly, truly mean that. If this episode gave you something, if you learned something that you didn't know, or you felt something shift, or if you've been in this kitchen with me for a while and this show matters to you, please, I beg of you to leave a review. 5 stars, a sentence, whatever you've got time for. Reviews are how people actually find us. Every single one puts this knowledge in front of somebody who actually needs it and doesn't even know that this show exists. I'm Molly Bravo. This is the Sovereign Kitchen Society. I want you to remember that food is and always will be our medium for connection. I'll see you next time.